The first time Miles Carter saw a firefly, he cupped it in both hands and turned to the girl standing beside him on the wooden rail of the bridge over Baker Creek. The creek ran like a worn shoelace through Willow Creek, Indiana, behind the brick library and the Methodist church. The girl was Elena Ramirez, Ellie to him, and she squinted into his cupped palms with the seriousness of a scientist. "Don't close it too tight," she warned, pushing up her crooked glasses. "It needs air." "I know," Miles said, though he didn't, not really. He opened his hands just enough to let a bit of evening slip in, and the firefly glowed again, a soft pulse against his thumb. "It's like it has its own flashlight." Ellie's grin was gaps and braces. "It's how they talk, like Morse code. My mom says in summer, Indiana turns into a galaxy right on the ground." They were 10. It was July. The cicadas were a noise you stopped hearing and then noticed when they paused, leaving a hole in the world. Down on the baseball field, a little league game was finishing, the coach whistling and a crowd clapping. The smell of cut grass and sunscreen stuck to the evening. On the bridge, the two of them leaned over the rail, their legs banged from bike pedals and gravel, their sneakers damp because they'd kicked off to wade. "Someday," Miles said, soft so he wouldn't scare the glow out of the air, "I'm going to build you a house on the hill, with a big porch. You can see the whole town." "That's a lot of wood," Ellie said, skeptical and delighted. "My uncle says wood's expensive now. There's been a drought." "I'll get some." He said it like he could ride to a lumber yard, load the boards into his backpack, and get to work. "And we'll have a lemonade. You'll make it. You make the best lemonade." "Too much sugar," my mom says. "Your mom's a professional. She's biased," he said, and Ellie laughed, a bright little thing, her chin lifted. If Miles talked about a porch, Ellie talked about maps. She had torn one from the back of a library atlas and freckled it with pencil. "When we're big," she told him, "you'll go all the places." She pointed to the way US 30 crossed the state like a tight belt. "I'll put pins so I can follow." This was Willow Creek. The library was cool on hot days and smelled like paperbacks and dust and the old librarian's jasmine perfume. The baseball field got chalk lines on Saturdays. The diner on Main, Marge's, served pie thick with fruit and sugar. After church, the potluck stretched down the fellowship hall on folding tables, and everyone had a casserole pan that had been in their family longer than the kids had been alive. And there were the two of them, a tangle of mild summers and true winters and everything you feel steady with when you're 10 and don't imagine the planet can tilt. They had their tree, an oak at the edge of the park where the creek widened. Ellie kept a shoelace ribbon tied around a branch, low enough to reach and high enough to stretch for. Miles called it their wish knot. Once a week, they'd retie it tighter and make a vow. It got dirty and frayed, and they loved it more. Under that oak, they traded things that had value only to them: a marble, a plastic ring, a baseball card with bent corners, a rubber band ball. That summer, Ellie made Miles a bracelet, red and blue thread braided until her small fingers ached. "It's a friendship bracelet," she said, offering it solemnly on her palm. "So when you go to other places, it will be like I'm holding your wrist, so you don't float away." "I won't float away. Just in case." He slid it on. It bit his skin lightly. He felt safer. They spent afternoons lying on the grass in the park, weaving stories from the clouds until their shoulders had little white lines where their shirts had blocked the sun. They shared peanut butter sandwiches under the bleachers when the rain came sudden and the creek swelled and the drizzle smelled like invisible chalk. When the county fair came through in August with its Ferris wheel and powdered sugar air. They pooled their dollars for tickets and took turns deciding which ride to go on. Ellie insisted on the carousel. Miles tolerated the horses because it made her laugh. She insisted on the Ferris wheel, too, of course. And at the top, when the ride stopped and the wheel creaked and the town looked like the map in her head, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "Don't look down," she said. He looked at her. He didn't know to name it love. That word, the big one, seemed like it belonged to adults and flickering TV dramas and the whispery parts of songs his mom turned down. What he had for Ellie was simpler and more ferocious. If she was sad, he felt it. If she was happy, it poured into him like soda fizz. He wanted to be where she was. He wanted to give her the best part of his cookie. They made a plan that the same day every week they'd ride their bikes to the Oak after school. It was more of a ceremony than a plan. He showed up 3 out of 4 times early, out of 3, because he liked to lie on his back and try to guess from the sound which car would pass next. Truck, minivan, an old sedan that always had its muffler hanging low. The day it changed, he didn't guess any cars. There were blue lights. He knew the feeling before the facts. It landed like the idea of a storm you can hear but not see, a hum in your bones. On the block where Ellie lived, the Lennys had their yard strewn with plastic toys. Ms. Sue had a neat lawn and flowers along the fence. Ellie's house had the paint curling at the corners. That day, there was a police cruiser in front and Mrs. Ramirez's car loaded to the roof with bags. Miles dropped his bike and ran. Ellie's mother was coming down the steps with a laundry basket in her arms, her face set in a way he had only seen when she was trying not to cry. "Ellie," Miles said, breathless. Mrs. Ramirez flinched and then relaxed when she saw him. "Mijo, you startled me." Her English was perfect, except when she was tired or sad. Then it softened around the edges, the vowels stretching into warmth, even when the words were hard. "Me," she swallowed. "We have to go. I'm so sorry." "What? Why?" He couldn't look at her eyes. He looked at the basket, a blanket he recognized from sleepovers, a corner of the bracelets kit Ellie had used for his. "It's not your fault," Mrs. Ramirez said, as if he might be the type to take blame for weather. "Things," she shook her head. "Your mom will tell you, or maybe she won't. It's not for children." He didn't want it to be anything. Ellie came out on the porch with a backpack, her face pale and thin. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail that made her look more like a kindergartner. She was wearing the red baseball cap he'd won at the carnival and given her because he'd only wanted to win it for the victory. "We're leaving," she said. Stupid, obvious, overrun by feelings. "Where?" he asked. She shook her head. "My aunt's, in Champagne, or maybe further, I don't know. It's, my mom says we have to be safe." She swallowed, the swallow of a person trying to keep their voice from going wild. "I didn't get to." She looked at him, and that was the worst. The open white look of someone who wants to stay and can't. They didn't get to tie the shoelace, or write it down, or make a vow. He reached for her hand, and she grabbed him like a handle on a door that will open. "I'll write you," he said. Nonsense, because he didn't know where to write. He wished for a magic trick, a secret code in the leaves, so he could see her whenever he wanted. She pulled him into a hug that cracked his chest open and put something inside he would carry for years. "Of course you will, and you will build the porch. Promise, promise," he said into her hair. A neighbor came out to look. He stepped back, embarrassed, masculine pride starting to rise, because someone was watching. He put his hand on the bracelet, hard enough to feel the slit in the yarn, where it had frayed and been tied again. Mrs. Ramirez touched Ellie's shoulder. "We have to go, mi amor." They got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk and watched Ellie press her hand to the glass 3 times, a pattern he would wake in the night, years later, and feel in his palm. The car rolled away. He ran after it and then stopped, because he knew what it looked like to run after something you couldn't catch. The police car pulled off. The block returned to its crabgrass and lemonade and slow, usual rhythm. The house looked like a mouth that had just lost a front tooth. Miles walked to the oak by himself. The shoelace ribbon was dirty and tight. He retied it. It didn't feel like anything. He wrote letters. He wrote them to Elena Ramirez, aunt's house, Champaign. And then he wrote one to Elena Ramirez, somewhere safe, and left it in the library book drop because it felt like mailing something to the universe. He asked his mom what had happened. She pulled him close and told him it was grown-up business. He went to bed and stared at the plastic stars on his ceiling and picked at the bracelet until a thread came loose. And then he stopped because he understood that it was not a thing you were allowed to break. Weeks grew around the absence like scar tissue. School started again. He saw the bench where she should have been, and the space sat beside him. Time, which is cruel and kind on its own inflexible schedule, continued. The shoelace got ragged and one day was gone, and he had to admit it had never been a spell. They lost contact completely. 25 years later, the Lakeview Inn sat on the edge of Harbor Ridge, Michigan, a 2-story clapboard building, 1 block off Lake Michigan, where the dunes rolled down to the water like sleeping animals, and the wind changed your hair every time you stepped outside. The hotel had the good kind of old carpets that didn't show wear, and the bad kind of window units that rattled like loose teeth. The neon sign buzzed and said vacancy in summer, no in winter, and its light landed in a puddle on the asphalt like a promise. Elena, no one called her Ellie anymore, not here, worked front desk morning shifts and housekeeping afternoons, depending on who was out sick. She had done the math enough times to know she could not be precious about the schedule. Tuesdays, she made the coffee thick enough to power a Midwestern county. Sundays, she wiped down the lobby tables with a rag that smelled like lemon and made sure the brochures, Dunes, Lighthouse, Cider Mill, were stacked straight. "Some guy's checking in late, Mr. Carter," Mrs. Patel told her as she shrugged on her sweater at the end of the evening, her bangles jingling. The Patels had bought the inn 20 years before with a loan from a cousin and determination you could feel in the hinges. "Make sure you save him a good room, the Lakeview." Elena, not Elena. Elena corrected a delivery guy who came in with more coffee filter packs. He flushed. She didn't have the energy to care. Names slipped off people's tongues in small ways that were not insults, but were little sand grains on your patience. She had learned to spend her reserves carefully. It was how you lasted. She was 35. The mirror told her she was pretty in the way real people are, not magazine, the kind of pretty that comes from good eyebrows and a mouth that knows how to soften when someone needs to hear good news. She had a small apartment above a used bookstore, and she had a cat who did not come when called and had been named Sprout by a librarian's daughter. She read in the evenings with the radio playing on low because silence sometimes shook loose a feeling she would rather keep in place. In the mornings, she ran by the lake until the cold bit her lungs, and she felt like she had a secret with the sunrise. She had tucked in a shoebox in her closet, a Polaroid of two kids on a Ferris wheel. She told herself she kept it because it was sweet, not because her hand paused when she took it out, and sometimes hovered over the boy's face, like he might warm under her fingertips. The edges had curled. The red hat in it was so loud you could almost hear the squeak of the Ferris wheel axle. If anyone had asked her, she would have said love was a thing of value she had not lost belief in, but had learned to be careful with. Men had come and gone. A few had been kind and decent, if not right. One had been charming until he wasn't. She had been not married. She had been engaged once, briefly, to a man who was a boat mechanic and smiled like morning. But it had ended the way a sparkle of sun leaves a wave, quickly and without malice. She had things she didn't tell at the bar after work. That once, when she was 10, she had made a vow to a boy on a bridge, and it had not been kept because the world does not make laws from childhood promises, and that somehow, despite that, something about that vow had kept a tiny light inside her alive. At 9:47, the bell over the door rang, and a burst of cold came through. A man came in with the travel look on him, coat unbuttoned in that relief of finally being inside, hair with the wind's signature in it, eyes slightly glazed from highway. He wheeled a small suitcase behind him, the expensive kind that rolls as quiet as good secrets. "Welcome to Lakeview," Elena said, automatic and warm, because when you work front desk, you're the town's first impression, and that matters. "Thanks," he said, exhaling like the lobby had saved him. He put his hands on the counter, broad hands, a tied leather bracelet at the wrist, and smiled. The smile was easy and clean. Reservation for Miles Carter. She typed. When the name lit on the screen, she hiccuped. Miles. She had not said that name out loud in years. It lived in a small, private chamber of her chest, like an old jar of something you kept because you couldn't throw it out, though you never opened it. Carter was not rare. Miles wasn't either. She swallowed. It would be one of those coincidences that are not coincidences because names repeat. She told herself this while something in her went still. "Lakeview?" she asked, and looked up at him for the first time, because she was a person with a face and he was too, and you meet people like that. She looked at his mouth, because mouths are easier than eyes. It had an old bruise of laughter in the way it rested. She looked at his eyes, and everything that had been still in her went louder. He stared at her. If this were a movie, there would have been a zoom. Life doesn't zoom. It gives you the sound of someone breathing and the thump of your own heart and the smell of heat leaving a wool coat. He blinked once, like he had seen something inside himself he didn't expect to see. Ellie, he said, before he could stop himself. The name landed on the counter between them, like a dropped coin. Elena felt it hit. It rolled. "Only my mom," she began, but her voice didn't work the first time. She tried again. "Only my mom called me that." They didn't do anything dramatic. No one cried yet. Mrs. Patel had left. The coffee was burning in the pot a little. A couple argued in a corner chair about whether to order pizza or walk to the place that had the good gyros. He said, and all the words in him rearranged themselves in old patterns. He had seen the front desk 100 times in 100 hotels, and in all of them he had never felt like he was stepping into a room he had left when he was 10, and had only now returned to. She put her hand on the counter. He put his next to it, not touching. She looked at his wrist. The leather bracelet there was not leather. It was red and blue, frayed to almost nothing. Time had eaten it to a whisper. "You kept it," she said, the words barely more than breath. "I tried to," he said, something trembling under his voice like bass. "I lost a lot. I didn't want to lose that." She laughed, a broken little sound, and then she covered her mouth with her hand and shook, and the tears came in a quick slide she didn't mean to let happen. She kept her hand over her mouth because she was at work, and this was a lobby, and there was a poster for the lighthouse tour to the left of the desk. And 2 teenage boys walked past, smelling like Axe body spray and salt water, and called the elevator like it was a competition. And she did not want to become a spectacle. But there are moments that make you visible because they change the light around you. She was in one. He didn't reach across the counter. He didn't dramatize it. He took a deep breath, and his eyes also filled, and then he blinked. They both steadied themselves like you steady when you get out of a car and your legs remember weight. "You're checked into 204, Elena said, because anchors matter. Lakeview. The radiator there needs a little talking to. If you jiggle the knob, it stops sounding like a freight train." She pulled a keycard from the drawer. Her hands were shaking. She slid it toward him. Their fingers touched for the first time in 25 years, and it was both shocking and gentle. A plug finally connecting to the correct outlet. "You're here," he said, and the words were not sophisticated, but they were truer than most things he had said in boardrooms. "I'm here," she said. He hesitated. "Would it be crazy if we coffee? Now? Or breakfast? Or both? If you're off? If you're not, I'll wait and sleep and not sleep and just be here." She checked the clock. It was 10:02. She was supposed to be here until 11. She knew Mrs. Patel would tell her to go, to do the human thing, because their family believed in the soft places where work and life overlapped, the places that made a hotel more than rooms and keys. But she thought she should follow a rule. She also thought if she waited, her courage would cheat her. "Give me 20 minutes, she said. "There's a diner down the block. Sun's, the blue sign. The pie's okay. The coffee is better. I'll be there," he said. He moved back from the counter like he'd learned gravity again. He picked up his bag, the quiet suitcase. He started toward the elevator and then turned and looked at her, as if to confirm she was still in 3 dimensions. She lifted her fingers in a small wave. He caught the elevator just as the teenage boys were holding it hostage. She breathed. She put the "will return at" clock to 10:20 and propped it neatly. She grabbed her coat. She found Mrs. Patel in the back office, counting petty cash. "Elena," Mrs. Patel said, "everything okay?" Elena nodded. "I need." She tried to find a phrase that would hold the truth and not sound like a joke. An old friend just checked in. Mrs. Patel's eyes were small and wise behind her glasses. "Go," she said. "We locksmiths don't make keys for one life only." Elena laughed softly. She snatched her scarf. Outside, the wind had turned cold and smelled like fish and pine and something metallic that always hovered in the air when the lake pressed into town. At Sun's, the vinyl seats shaped to your body the way only diner booths can. A woman behind the counter poured coffee and called people hun. A TV mounted in the corner ran a muted game with subtitles. Miles had chosen a booth near the window with a view of the small strip of stores. Hardware, real estate, bait shop with a faded poster of a walleye taped crooked in the window. When she walked in, the bell shook itself, and he stood automatically. He wore a gray sweater that fit him like someone had measured his shoulders with care. His hair had threaded itself with silver, but didn't show off about it. He had the look some men got when they had learned to carry responsibility without making it your fault. Alert, like the air in him was on. "Hi," she said idiotically, because anything else would have been too much and not enough. They sat. They looked. The waitress came with a pot and smiled at the warm lake of money vibe that always follows a certain kind of man, like the smell of a good store. "Coffee?" "Yes," they said together and grinned, the old good kind. They ordered pancakes because nostalgia is corny and delicious. They added eggs because they were Midwestern and mistrusted sweetness without grateful protein. The waitress called the order without writing it down. 2 stacks, 2 over easy, and someone in the back yelled, "You got it, Nancy," in a voice that felt like high school basketball games and car rides with the windows down. "You married?" he asked, trying out bravery. She shook her head. "No. You?" "No, I." He hesitated, the truth wanting and unsure. "I dated people I liked." That's the normal thing to say. But mostly I dated the idea of someone who could put me back in a room I'd been in when I was 10 and didn't have words for it. She looked down at her hands. She had nicked her ring finger that morning on a key. There was a thin red line. She put her finger over it like a promise, and then moved her hand, not wanting to hide. "I thought maybe I made you up." "I thought the same thing," he said. "Except I have this." He touched the bracelet. "I've replaced it 3 times. The thread. I mean the thread of the thread. Stupid. But not stupid," she said, and surprised herself with the ferocity of it. Not stupid at all. They talked. The ways their lives had forked, and the ways they still mirrored each other, sat there, between them, like a split screen, finally aligned. Miles had built companies. He had started small, at a rented desk, in a co-working space with a view of an alley, building a logistics platform with two friends who knew more about coding than sleep. They had delivered holiday packages for toy companies who would never know his name. He learned, fast, that a scale of numbers does not feed you, and yet it is a beautiful thing to watch grow. He took one company public and sold another, and found himself at 35 with multiple LLCs with his name on them, and a feeling like he had been running alongside a train and now stood beside it and didn't know whether to jump back on. He lived in 3 cities, but never settled in them. He had a bed in San Francisco with a view of the bay, and a condo in New York where the floor-to-ceiling windows made him feel like an aquarium fish. He had a driver in Chicago, and an assistant who bought him socks without holes. He had friends. He had board meetings and research reports, and a nutritionist who once told him certain foods made him puffy, and he had laughed for 3 minutes because the idea of a human being being puffy amused him more than it should have. Elena had lived a smaller life, if you counted by square footage and bank accounts, but not if you counted by phone numbers saved under first names with hearts next to them. She had moved with her mom a dozen times after Willow Creek, following jobs and family and the gravity of people you love. In Champaign, in Muncie, in Benton Harbor, in a clean apartment over a hair salon for 6 months, where the hot water had a mind of its own. She had earned an associate's degree, 1 class at a time, and been 1 hospital bill away from debt that would have swallowed her. She had learned to fix a leaky faucet and bounce a check without it clattering too loud. She had stayed with her mother through chemo and hospice and did not regret a second, except the days she'd resented and then felt guilty for resenting. After her mother died, she had come to Harbor Ridge at the invitation of her cousin, who had moved to Milwaukee and then Alaska, and was the kind of person who never wore a winter hat and called cold bracing. The job at the Lakeview had been a favor, and then, quickly, a calling, because Elena discovered she loved hospitality. The way you could create an overnight home for people. The way you could set a tray of coffee out at 6 a.m. and watch tired faces ease when they saw it. The way you could remember someone liked 2 pillows or didn't want housekeeping to come in while they were at breakfast because their sister was a nursing mom. They traded stories like postcards. He talked about airports, how at one in Minneapolis there was a piano anyone could play, and sometimes a child would sit and plunk out scales, and all the traveling adults, hardened by schedules, would soften and imagine their own old childhood pianos. She talked about the lighthouse tours, the way couples held each other's elbows on the steps when they were older, the way teenage boys raced and got scolded by mothers who would later wipe the sweat off their necks with tissues pulled from sleeves. "Do you think it's cheesy how much I love small things?" Elena asked, fork on her plate. "When you've seen so much big." "No," he said, instantly. "Or if it is, I'm cheesy. I used to walk to a diner in San Mateo every Sunday just because the server there called me hun, and it reset something in me for Monday. Big as a scale, not a moral good." "I like that," she said softly. "Big as a scale, not a moral good." The waitress came and topped their coffee and said, "You two look like you just found your middle school best friends," and then laughed at her own accuracy. "We did," Miles said.
"You want pie?" Nancy asked. "Yes," they said, again together like a trick. He paid, and Elena rolled her eyes when he left a tip that was too big, but didn't say anything because it was also nice to be generous, and also because she suspected this was a part of him, the way he solved feelings with money, sometimes inappropriately and sometimes beautifully. They walked along the block after, their steps finding a rhythm. "Do you want to go see the lake?" she asked. "I want to go wherever you go next," he said, too honest, and then shrugged, catching himself and embarrassed by none of it. "I mean, yeah, the lake, please." At the lake, the moon pulled a white stroke over the water. They stood on the public beach and listened to the waves slap and retreat. It was mid-October, and the sand was cold in the way that holds the day's heat in a secret layer and then gives it up like a sigh when you step. "I thought about you," she said. "I thought you had probably forgotten me because you had a life to live, and I was a child in it, and you are supposed to outgrow the clothes you wore when you were 10. He made a sound you make when you've been guttered. I didn't forget you. I built things so I could stand on top of them and maybe see farther. It didn't work, the seeing. But the building?" He shrugged. "I like building. I like the way everybody wants to be good at the same time." She smiled. "You always like to take apart the toaster." "It was wired wrong." "It was not," she protested, and looked at him with a quick flash of the old teasing. "I thought about you," she said. "I thought you had probably forgotten me because you had a life to live, and I was a child in it, and you are supposed to outgrow the clothes you wore when you were 10. He made a sound you make when you've been guttered. I didn't forget you. I built things so I could stand on top of them and maybe see farther. It didn't work, the seeing. But the building?" He shrugged. "I like building. I like the way everybody wants to be good at the same time." She smiled. "You always like to take apart the toaster." "It was wired wrong." "It was not," she protested, and looked at him with a quick flash of the old teasing. They met the next day again, and the next. He stayed in 204 and learned the radiator's language. He learned that the inn's back staircase was exactly 31 steps, that the towels were folded by Lisa with the tattoo of a sunflower on her wrist, and that hers were the neatest, that the window in the lobby whistled when the wind was wrong, that Elena had a way of tying her hair up with a pencil that never fell. He learned that she sat on the floor when she moved from message to message in the reservation system, because the rolling chair made a noise that grated on her spine. He learned that she kept a little notebook where she wrote down the first names of the regulars, and their preferences, and their dogs' names, and that she made a particular J for Johnny, the kid who came with his dad in the summers, that looked like joy. He had to go to meetings in the city 2 hours away, and he went, and he did them. And he found himself looking at the people around the table and thinking, I am listening to you, and also I'm remembering a girl with braces who showed me how to blow through a blade of grass to make it whistle. He drove back before dinner and took Elena to the farmer's market, where the apples now had names that sounded like characters. Honeycrisp, Mutsu, Zestar. And they sampled slivers with toothpicks, and he bought 2 bags too many, because sometimes abundance is delicious. On the 4th day, after a morning spent reading on her couch while she worked the desk, because there is nothing like 2 people inhabiting the same space and doing their own work to make you feel like you found something. He got an email he almost didn't read. His assistant had flagged it. He clicked out of habit. Subject: Harbor Ridge Acquisition.
Carter Hospitality Portfolio has finalized the letter of intent to acquire the Lakeview Inn in Harbor Ridge, Michigan. Negotiations are late stage. Closing date, December 15th. Per discussion with COO, plan is to fold into North Lake's brand, replace signage, renovate rooms, centralize reservation system. Redundancy expected. 60 to 70% staff. He read it again. Carter. Hospitality. His name. His arm. Something in his chest turned. He scrolled to the bottom. The contact. Nathan Lee, COO. Attached, an analysis that would have impressed him most days. Occupancy rates. Cash flow. Deferred maintenance. Brand potential. It was smart. Surgical. The way you do things when you aren't sitting at a front desk with a pencil in your hair, watching a woman you love write a list of which pillows to replace. He stood. He walked to the desk. He waited until there were no guests in earshot. He said, "Elena, can we?" She looked at his face and knew something had tipped. She was busy. She was never rude to a guest. But he was also now a person who could come up to the desk and part the world. "What is it?" she asked, stepping back into the small office. He showed her the email. She took his phone. He watched her eyes move. He saw the moment she understood. Tired grief of people who tell themselves they should have expected it. "You knew?" she asked, a knife under the softness. Bewilderment more than accusation. "No," he said quickly. "I swear. I am not the hospitality stuff. Nathan runs it. I'm supposed to oversee. I have been absent on that arm, Elena. And this is on me. I'm sorry." She handed the phone back. She touched the bridge of her nose like she had an itch there that had been waiting 25 years. "Of course it would be you," she said, a small laugh that was not funny. "No, not you. You. Your name." "Fine, no, that's not fair," she breathed. "This is my job." "I know," he said, useless. His instinct, his terrible and beautiful habit, rose like a wave. "Fix it. Buy it. Control the thing. Build the porch." He caught it. He held it in his teeth. "What do you want?" he asked instead, which was a new question for him to ask at the beginning rather than the end. She blinked. "I want." She looked at the lobby, the plant in the corner, with its leaves that drooped when the heat flicked off, the bowl of complimentary mints that always had more peppermint ones on the bottom because kids took the wintergreen, the guest book where the owner's granddaughter drew hearts in the margins. "I want this place to stay what it is. It's not fancy. It's ours. The Patels put their life into it. We keep extra blankets in the office because the lake makes you think you won't be cold, and then you are, and we don't make you beg for them. I want the people who clean rooms here to not lose $13 an hour. I want to be able to put my head on my pillow in my apartment above the bookstore and not wonder if I will be able to pay rent in 2 months. Because some men in a different city decided my lobby needed to smell like grapefruit instead of lemon. He nodded. He didn't say anything for a minute, because sometimes your responses are not what is needed. Then, okay. She narrowed her eyes. What does okay mean when you say it? It means I'll call Nathan and tell him to pause. It means I'll drive to his office, and if he says he can't pause because of X and Y, I will make up Z. It means I will sit down with the Patels and you and see if we can make something that isn't the thing we were about to make. I can't promise I can pull the red wire and the bomb will stop ticking. I can promise I'll try like hell. She stared at him. Don't do this because of me. I'm doing this because of me, he said. Honest as bone. Because this company is mine and I don't recognize the handwriting on this letter, and because I don't want to let men with spreadsheets tell me what home smells like. Her face cracked. She looked like she might cry or kiss him or both. She did neither. She gripped the edge of the desk and took a breath so large it changed the weather in the room. Okay, she said. Okay. He left within the hour and drove down to Grand Rapids because the flights always took longer than 2 hours if you counted the time at the airport. He barged into an office and interrupted a meeting. He was not a man who barged. He said to a room of suits, "We're not bulldozers, right?" And the suits looked at each other like, who knew? He sat with Nathan and heard about economies of scale and brand uniformity, and he agreed with the parts he had always agreed with and then disagreed with the things he had not thought to question. They argued. They did algebra where feelings are the X factor. He made calls. He called the Patels. He listened to Mr. Patel talk about the loan in 2002 and the time they had heat out for 3 days in January, and the way Elena had come in on her day off to take the night shift because the pipes had burst. He asked questions his assistant would later tell him are not typical due diligence, like who cusses out a kid behind the counter when the credit card machine fails? And the answer was no one, because people in Harbor Ridge understood the difference between a machine and a person. 3 days later, he came back to the Lakeview. He looked exhausted and alive. Elena was at the desk and saw him and felt her mouth go dry. I can't call it a win yet, because lawyers ruin words, he said, half smiling. But we're looking at keeping the Patels as majority owners. We put in money for renovations, new windows, better HVAC, a front desk system that doesn't crash if you look at it hard. We take a smaller brand piece, an affiliation that gets you into some travel sites without changing the sign. ESOP for employees, so they get profit share. If you want. If they want. If we can get it through. If, so many ifs. But I think it's possible. She put her hand to her mouth again, because hands are useful when your heart is doing calisthenics. You did this? I just had a particular set of keys, he said, shrugging. The Patels did it. You get it by existing with such force. And also I did it because I didn't want to see the room where we sat and drank coffee become a room that smells like grapefruit. Lemon is fine. Lemon is good. She rounded the desk and hugged him like she had 10, only now their bodies were bigger and wrote different stories against each other. He hugged back. And for a moment he lowered his forehead to her shoulder. And if anyone had walked into the lobby then and seen the way time was stacked, they would have backed out with the reverence of someone who has caught someone in prayer. "Don't rescue me," she whispered into his sweater. And he understood she meant, "Don't fall in love with being a hero and forget the person you came to stand beside." "I won't," he said into her. They fell into a thing that had no need to be named daily to exist. He divided his weeks. On Tuesdays, he was in Chicago, in a room high above the street with a view of the river like a cut of steel. On Thursdays, he was in Harbor Ridge, learning from Mrs. Patel how the register had to be closed by hand because the old software did not admit the new machine existed. He discovered he liked the monotony of some tasks. He didn't feel cheated by replacing light bulbs, because when he turned the switch, a room lit. He wondered if maybe in a past life he had loved being a lineman, stitching light across the country. They walked on the beach in ridiculous hats in January. They drank mugs of chili at the community center while teenagers played basketball, and a pastor he didn't recognize in regular clothes refereed. They went to the 4th of July parade in July because Elena insisted, and he sat on the curb with her and let fire trucks roll by and wave, and a little boy handed him a piece of candy like a knight offering a prize. And when the fireworks went off over the lake that night, they put their hands over their hearts without meaning to, because love of place and love of person share some wiring. He asked if she wanted to see Willow Creek. She said yes, quickly, like a river saying yes to a bend. They drove 2 hours south and turned onto streets he had learned by bike and by foot. The library still smelled like paper and dust. The Methodist church had a new ramp. The baseball field's grass had been reseeded 2 summers ago, according to a man in a hat who told them everything without asking, and then said, "You two here for the game?" And it took them a minute to answer, because they were here for a game that had ended long ago. They went to the oak. It was taller, of course, but it was still an oak. Still the particular bark pattern he could have drawn without looking. The branch where the shoelace had been was thicker. There was no shoelace. Of course there wasn't. Time is a very efficient housekeeper. "I have a ribbon in the glove compartment," Elena said, and then laughed at herself and at fate, because she had, since she was 10, often carried something, to tie to something, to remind herself that things could be held. She retrieved it. It was yellow, the color of a field in a crayon box. They stood under the branch and tried to throw it over and failed. Once, twice, 3 times, and laughed. And finally he cupped his hands and she stepped onto them. New weight, necessary, and she reached and tied the ribbon tight. They stood looking at it. He took her hand. "I wanted," he said, not sure how to say it, "to say I love you, without sounding like a man who thinks words fix things, because I know they don't. But I do." She looked at him. Her eyes were not the same as they were at 10, but something in them had the same map. "I love you," she said, not as echo, but as original. "Even if we didn't have names for this for a long time." He pressed his forehead to hers, like a man who had been running a long time, and finally stopped and let his heart catch up. They kissed, slow and familiar, like a beat learned long ago and finally returned to. There was no audience, no music except the mumble of traffic on the distant highway, and a lawnmower somewhere, and a boy calling to a dog. The dog barked and ran. It was very American in the least mythic, most true way. Ordinary things happening at the edge of something that was not ordinary at all. They sat on the grass until their jeans got damp. He told her about nights when he had stood in a kitchen in a city and stared at a lit microwave clock and felt like someone had left the room and he didn't know who. She told him about mornings when she had been at the desk and the sun had come in through the window, just so, and she had felt a pain that was not unhappiness, but a shape of missing. And she had told herself to be grateful because she had a job and the wind off the lake and a cat who loved her in a prickly way. They forgave themselves the ways they had survived. They didn't make each other into rescue or salvation. They were just themselves, recognizable. They went back to Harbor Ridge and made a life. It was not glamorous in the step and repeat sense. It was glamorous in the way they held the lobby door open for each other and for strangers. He traveled less, and when he did, he sent a picture from the airport piano whenever someone was playing. Because some jokes are a kindness you build over years. She took a management course online and got a raise, even though she told herself she wasn't the type to ask for one. The ESOP went through, and the housekeeping staff had a meeting where Mrs. Patel explained what equity meant. And then they all clapped and ate donuts and asked, "So, like, we own it?" And she said, "A little bit, yes." And someone cried in quiet relief. The Lakeview Inn replaced its windows that winter, and the heat ran strong. And when the wind whistled, it did it outside. They put a wooden swing on the inn's front porch, because sometimes you get to make dreams literal. Miles hammered it like a teenager/father/person whose hands liked to remember they could do simple work. He wrote a check for a scholarship fund in his mother's name for high school kids in Willow Creek who wanted to go to trade school or college, because money isn't love, but it is, sometimes, a bridge. And there were small things that stitched days into a blanket so large you could lie under it without seeing the edges. Sunday pancakes at Sun's, where Nancy always pretended they were regulars, even before they were. Thursday night open mic at the community center, where Elena read a poem once, and he sat in the back like the world's happiest cliche, tearing quietly while pretending to cough. Early March nights, when the ice on the lake cracked and groaned and taught them what it sounds like when a body of water decides to be free again. On the anniversary of the ribbon in Willow Creek, they drove back. They brought a jar. They stood on the bridge and waited. Grown people waiting like children. The fireflies came in slow fits, and then all at once, rising from the grass like tiny lanterns, and the air filled with that pull of light that makes even people who are not poets reconsider. He cupped one in his hands, careful. She leaned in and looked. He opened his fingers and the bug pulsed and lifted. He blew gently and it rose, and she made the sound a person makes when something very small and very big happen at the same time. "Do you remember?" he said. that you told me they talk with their light? Of course, she said. They say I love you, obviously. He laughed, and then he took something from his pocket. It wasn't a ring. Rings were fine. He liked rings. But this was a thing that felt like a different kind of promise. It was the red and blue friendship bracelet. The original one was long gone, a few fibers tucked safe in a box. But "Will you?" he began, and then stopped, and then started over, in a way that felt like walking down church steps. I want to be on your side. I want to watch TV on your couch and argue about whether we should order Chinese or leftover chili. I want to go to work and care about numbers and then come home and care about your face. I want to wake up and make terrible pancakes and have you scold me with love. I want to fight with you sometimes because we're human. And then I want us to apologize. I want you, whatever form that takes. Marriage, eventually? Yes. But first, now, this. Will you be in the world with me? Like when we were 10 and we didn't have words, except now we do and we can use them. She listened with her whole body, and then she smiled and her eyes filled, and she nodded. And the nod was the best thing he had ever seen. Yes, she said. And yes again. He slid the bracelet onto her wrist. It fit. He let out a breath that had been in him for 25 years. They kissed on the bridge, where children sneak to be braver than their parents suspect. No one saw them except for a kid on a bike who swooped past and then, later, would draw a heart in the dust of his windowsill and not know why. Back at the Lakeview, they told Mrs. Patel, who cried and hugged them and said, "Of course," as if she had always known. They told Nance at Sons, who told the world because the world sat in booths and drank coffee and listened. On summer nights, they sat on the inn's porch swing after the last check-in, Elena's head on Miles's shoulder, a jar of fireflies between them, like a candle that didn't burn. They said things like, "Remember when the radiator sounded like a freight train? And remember how the lake ice moaned in March? And remember the yellow ribbon? And remember the oak?" They built a small list of things they never wanted to forget and reminded each other. They refused to be embarrassed by their sentimentality.